What is communication? Etymologically speaking, the word communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means common. However, in the context of communication, as a discipline, the term refers to the sharing of ideas in common. In other words, communication is the transmission and interaction of facts, ideas, opinions, feelings or attitudes. Put differently, communication is the process of passing ideas, views, facts, information, and understanding from one person to another. Communication has several characteristics. First, in terms of persons involved. Communication involves at least two persons, namely, the sender and the receiver. The sender sends the message and the receiver receives the message. Hence, in communication, there is an exchange of information between two or more persons. Second, in terms of process. Communication is essentially a two-way process. It does not merely mean sending and receiving messages. It is not complete unless and until the message has been understood by the receiver in the same sense. Third, in terms of form. Communication may take several forms, for example, order, instruction, report, and queries. It may be verbal or written. It may be formal or informal. Fourth, in terms of scope. Communication is present in all human relationships. It is essential in all types of organizations and at all levels of management. Indeed, it has a very wide scope. Fifth, in terms of mood. Communication is influenced by the mood and thinking of the sender and receiver. It keeps on changing depending upon the level of understanding of the sender and receiver. Sixth, in terms of goal. Communication is goal-oriented and is effective only when there is a congruence of goals of the sender and the receiver. Seventh, in terms of disciplines involved. Communication is interdisciplinary. In fact, it derives knowledge from several sciences like anthropology, sociology, and psychology. It is important to note that the linking between and among these sciences makes communication effective. Eighth, in terms of purpose. The main purpose of communication is to influence the human behavior, which creates interpersonal relations. Hence, communication is interpersonal. And ninth, in terms of flow. It must be noted that there is circular flow of information in the communication process. After the feedback, the receiver of the original message is required to transmit another message, and the response indicates the success of the communication. Speaking of process, communication has following components, namely 1. Sender or communicator. 2. Message. 3. Encoding. 4. Channel or medium. 5. Receiver. 6. Decoding. 7. Noise. And 8. Feedback. First, the sender is someone with ideas, intentions, information, and a purpose for communicating. She is the source, or initiator of the communication. She has something with a meaning to communicate. And it must be noted that communication begins when a sender identifies the need to send a message based on certain reasons. Second, the sender encodes meaning into a message that can be transmitted. The message represents the meaning the source is trying to convey. Third, the function of encoding is to provide a form in which ideas and purpose can be expressed as a message. The result of the encoding process is the message. Encoding involves translating the sender's intent or ideas into a systematic set of symbols or gestures. Fourth, the channel is the carrier of the message. It is the link that connects the source and the receiver. In organizations, for example, the channel or medium can take the form of such components as face-to-face communication, telephone calls, meetings, or other written reports. Fifth, the receiver is the individual whose senses perceive the sender's message. There may be one or many receivers. It is important to note that if the message does not reach the receiver, then communication is not completed. Sixth, decoding is the process by which the receiver interprets the message and translates it into meaningful information. Please note that decoding is a two-step process, which involves 1. The receiver must first perceive the message, and 2. The receiver must then interpret it. It must also be noted that the decoding process is very much affected by some factors, such as the receiver's need, status, past experience, situational factors, and the like. Seventh, in communication, noise can be thought of as those factors that disturb or distort the intended message. Noise may occur in each of the elements of communication. And as we can see, noise hinders communication. Eighth, a feedback provides a link or channel for the communicator to know the receiver's response and to determine whether the message has been received and has produced the intended change. Feedback may come in many ways. In face-to-face communication, feedback comes through facial expressions of the receiver. Some indirect means of feedback are such factors as declines in productivity, poor quality of production, lack of coordination, absenteeism, and the like. Feedback may cause the sender to modify his future communication. Now, how can we communicate effectively? If we have a reasonably good understanding of the process of communication and its problems, barriers and breakdowns, it should not be difficult to make our communication effective. It must, however, be made clear that ideal communication is rarely achieved. Perhaps it does not exist. But we can, and should, strive to acquire all those skills and take care of all those aspects that make communication effective. As one scholar has very well said, ideals are like stars. We may never reach them, but they keep guiding our path. So is the case with communication. Below are just some of the important guidelines that will help us communicate effectively. First is clarity of purpose. In the first place, we must make a careful analysis of what exactly we wish to communicate. In business, for example, we may not be able to clarify the issue completely, unless it is by nature very simple. But any effort made in this direction proves to be fruitful. Hence, it is absolutely necessary to understand the purpose of our message. This, of course, requires careful planning. Note that lack of planning becomes the first major barrier in communication. This is because communication does not just take place. We have to make all possible efforts to understand the whys and hows, the whens and wheres, and above all, the whats of our message. As George Bernard Shaw says, the major mistake in communication is to believe that it happens. Second is that activity must be shared. Let us not forget that effective communication is the responsibility of all persons in the organization. They may be at any level, managerial or non-managerial. They are all working towards a common goal. It means that all of them have a share, directly or indirectly, in many different ways, in the process of communication. Whether communication is effective can be judged on the basis of the intended results. And the results are the responsibility of the entire organization. It has, therefore, to be group responsibility. Managers are advised to consult with others whenever necessary. Often it is necessary to seek the authority to communicate before a message is sent, or someone is to be kept in the picture in regard to the action intended. It is, therefore, useful to remember the headings, for action, and for information, when communications are being planned. And third is having a common set of symbols. The encoding and decoding of the message should be done with symbols that are familiar to the sender and the receiver. It is an immutable condition of communication that the code or set of symbols be mutually understood or intelligible. That is why managers, and especially the specialist staff, are advised to avoid unnecessary technical jargon, which is intelligible only to the experts in their respective fields. It must be noted that quite often communication becomes ineffective if the specialists, or technical experts, who are accustomed to using a special kind of vocabulary and phraseology among themselves, use their particular variety of language even with the administrative or account section of the organization. Hence, we must remember that, beyond our jargon, there is a common core of language.